Karen's shrill voice pierced the air as she shrieked into the phone. Those chickens are wearing asterisk sweaters asterisk. Little did she know, the cozy knits were charity-funded, a gesture of kindness for rescue hens. But Karen's tirade was just the start of a heated battle that would rock this tight-knit community to its core. Karen slammed the receiver down, her face flushed with fury. "That's it," she spat, glaring out the window at the gently clucking chickens, their multicolored sweaters swaying in the breeze. "Those things have got to go." She snatched up her phone again, fingers flying as she typed out an angry email to the neighborhood association. "Subversive animal abuse," she ranted, eyes narrowed. "These so-called rescue chickens are a blight on our community. Something must be done." Meanwhile, across the street, Chloe looked up from her gardening, a concerned frown creasing her brow. She'd been so proud when the local knitting circle had volunteered to make sweaters for her hens, a way to keep the rescue birds warm through the chilly winter months. Now it seemed her kind gesture had sparked the ire of the neighborhood's most notoriously cantankerous resident. Wiping the dirt from her hands, Chloe hurried inside, her heart pounding. She had to warn her husband, Greg. This was sure to escalate quickly. Greg listened grimly as Chloe recounted Karen's tirade, his jaw tightening. "That woman has been nothing but trouble since we moved in," he muttered. "But there's no way she can make us get rid of the chickens. They're not hurting anyone." "I know, but you know how the HOA is," Chloe fretted. "If she stirs up enough of a fuss, they might force us to comply." Greg's eyes narrowed. "Well, we're not going down without a fight." He reached for the phone, already dialing the number for the neighborhood association president. The next morning, Greg and Chloe braced themselves as they stepped outside, half expecting to find Karen lurking around the corner, ready to pounce. But the street was eerily quiet, until the sound of an engine rumbled to life. Chloe's eyes widened as Karen's shiny SUV pulled out of the driveway, the woman herself behind the wheel. "Where do you suppose she's off to?" Greg murmured, his brow furrowed. The answer became clear a few hours later when a large truck emblazoned with the logo of the local animal control agency pulled up in front of Chloe and Greg's house. Two burly men in uniform climbed out, clipboards in hand. "Ma'am, we've received a report of illegal livestock on the premises," one of them announced, his voice gruff. "We're here to inspect the property and, if necessary, remove any unauthorized animals." Chloe's heart sank. But those are my rescue chickens," she stammered. "They're not causing any harm, and the neighborhood association president approved them." The men exchanged a glance. "We'll need to see documentation," the other officer said, his tone flat. "In the meantime, we'll have to confiscate the animals." Greg stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "You can't just take our chickens," he protested. "This is a clear abuse of power." The officers didn't flinch. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to consider this a case of animal neglect," the first one warned. "Now, if you'll please step aside." As the men advanced toward the coop, Chloe and Greg shared a desperate look. This was not going to end well. The confrontation quickly devolved into chaos as Chloe and Greg desperately tried to block the officers from reaching the chickens. Feathers flew, and the hens squawked in alarm as the men attempted to corral them into the transport cages. "Stop! You can't do this," Chloe cried, tears streaming down her face as she shielded the coop with her own body. Greg stood beside her, face red with fury, yelling at the top of his lungs. The commotion attracted the attention of their neighbors, who began to gather around the scene, murmuring in dismay. Karen, standing smugly on her front porch, watched the spectacle with undisguised glee. "What's going on here?" A new voice cut through the din, and the crowd parted to reveal the neighborhood association president, Ms. Wilkins, striding towards the fray. "These officers are trying to confiscate our chickens, Ms. Wilkins," Greg shouted. "Karen reported us, but we have your approval." Ms. Wilkins frowned, her gaze shifting between the distraught couple and the unruffled animal control officers. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "The chickens were approved, and the sweaters were a charitable donation." "Ma'am, we have a report of illegal livestock," one of the officers replied evenly. "We're simply following protocol." Ms. Wilkins' lips thinned. "Well, you can tell whoever filed that report that they've made a grave mistake." She turned to Chloe and Greg, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry for this misunderstanding. I'll make sure it's resolved immediately." As the officers retreated, grudgingly, the crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and angry mutters. Chloe and Greg sagged with relief, holding each other tightly. But they knew the battle was far from over. The following week, Chloe and Greg braced themselves as they approached the community center for the monthly neighborhood association meeting. They knew Karen would be there, and the confrontation was inevitable. Sure enough, as soon as they stepped through the doors, Karen's shrill voice rang out. "There they are, the chicken abusers," she exclaimed, pointing an accusatory finger at them. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned towards the couple. Chloe felt her face flush with embarrassment, but Greg squared his shoulders, ready to defend their position. "Karen, you know full well that our chickens are approved by the association," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The sweaters were a charitable donation, and they're not causing any harm." "Harm?" Karen scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Those filthy birds are a blight on our community. They're lowering our property values and attracting all sorts of vermin. Something must be done." "That's enough, Karen," Ms. Wilkins interjected, her tone stern. "The chickens are perfectly legal, and we're not going to entertain any more of your baseless complaints." Karen's face twisted with fury, and she opened her mouth to retort, but Ms. Wilkins raised a hand, silencing her. "This matter is closed," the association president declared. "If you continue to harass the Petersons, you will face consequences." The room erupted in a mix of murmurs and applause, and Chloe felt a weight lift from her shoulders. But she knew that Karen was far from defeated, and the battle was far from over. In the days that followed, the tension in the neighborhood only seemed to escalate. Chloe and Greg found themselves on high alert, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of trouble. One morning, as Chloe was tending to the chickens, she noticed something strange. The feeders were empty, and the water troughs had been knocked over. Frowning, she began to suspect foul play. When Greg returned home from work, Chloe shared her concerns. "Do you think Karen could be behind this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Greg's jaw tightened. "I wouldn't put it past her," he growled. "We need to find a way to catch her in the act." They decided to set up a hidden camera near the coop, hoping to catch any would-be saboteurs in the act. The next few days passed without incident, but then, one evening, the camera captured a startling sight. There, in the dim light of dusk, was Karen, sneaking around the coop with a can of what appeared to be pesticide. Chloe and Greg watched in horror as she sprayed the liquid around the structure, cackling to herself. "That's it," Greg exclaimed, his eyes burning with fury. "I'm going to the police." Chloe reached out, grasping his arm. "Wait," she said, her voice low and determined. "I have a better idea." The following day, Chloe and Greg invited the entire neighborhood to a special chicken appreciation event. To their surprise, the turnout was impressive, with even some of Karen's staunchest supporters showing up. As the guests mingled and admired the chickens, now sporting their colorful sweaters, Chloe and Greg discreetly passed around a petition. The document called for the neighborhood association to officially recognize the chickens as sanctioned pets and implement strict rules against harassment or sabotage. When it came time for the raffle drawing, Chloe dramatically revealed the winning ticket, and it belonged to none other than Karen herself. The woman's face twisted with disbelief as Greg approached her, holding the petition. "Congratulations, Karen," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But before you claim your prize, we have something we'd like you to sign." Karen's eyes narrowed as she scanned the document, her lips pursing. "You can't be serious," she spat. I won't sign this nonsense. Oh, but you will, Chloe interjected, her tone uncompromising. Unless, of course, you'd prefer we share the footage of you sabotaging our coop with the entire neighborhood and the police. Karen's face drained of color, and the crowd around them erupted in a chorus of outrage and disbelief. Realizing she had been caught red-handed, the woman had no choice but to relent, grudgingly scrawling her name at the bottom of the petition. As the event drew to a close, Chloe and Greg watched with satisfaction as their neighbors enthusiastically signed the document, their support for the rescue chickens clear. The battle had been won, but they knew that with Karen, the war was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Chloe and Greg found themselves basking in a newfound sense of community support. The petition had been a resounding success, and the neighborhood association had swiftly enacted strict regulations to protect the chickens from any further harassment or sabotage. Karen, however, remained a thorn in their side. She sulked around the neighborhood, muttering under her breath, her beady eyes constantly trained on the coop. Chloe and Greg knew it was only a matter of time before she struck again. Their suspicions were confirmed when, one morning, they discovered that the chickens' water troughs had been intentionally clogged, causing the birds to go thirsty. Chloe's heart sank as she watched the hens' distress, and she immediately called the police. Within an hour, 2 officers were on the scene, interviewing Chloe and Greg and examining the evidence. They promised to keep a close eye on the situation, and Chloe felt a glimmer of hope that justice might finally be served. But that hope was short-lived. Just a few days later, Chloe opened her front door to find a flyer plastered across it, its bold text proclaiming, "Chicken abuse in our community." The flyer went on to make wild accusations about the chickens' living conditions and claimed that Chloe and Greg were harboring an illegal and dangerous flock. Chloe's hands trembled as she tore the flyer down, her stomach churning with outrage. She knew Karen was behind this latest attack, and she was determined to put an end to it once and for all. Chloe and Greg wasted no time in calling an emergency meeting with the neighborhood association. When they arrived, they were relieved to see that the room was packed with their supportive neighbors, all equally incensed by Karen's latest antics. "This has gone too far," Ms. Wilkins declared, her usually calm demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. "Karen's actions are not only harassing and defamatory, but they are also a clear violation of our community bylaws." The president then announced that the association had voted unanimously to take legal action against Karen, filing a restraining order and a lawsuit for damages. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, and Chloe felt the weight lift from her shoulders. But Karen, undeterred, continued her campaign of terror. She plastered the neighborhood with more flyers, accosted Chloe and Greg in the street, and even went so far as to contact the local media, spinning her fictitious tale of chicken abuse. However, the community refused to be cowed. Neighbors banded together, organizing a PR campaign to counter Karen's lies and highlight the positive impact of the rescue chickens. They shared heartwarming stories of the hens' transformation, and the local news outlets, once swayed by Karen's accusations, now eagerly featured the chickens' redemption tale. In the end, Karen's crusade backfired spectacularly. The restraining order was granted, and the lawsuit resulted in a substantial financial penalty that forced the woman to relocate to a different neighborhood. Chloe and Greg, surrounded by their newfound allies, breathed a sigh of relief, their beloved chickens safe and secure. As the community celebrated their victory, they knew that their story had become a rallying cry for others facing similar battles against entitled Karens and their abuses of power. The lesson was clear. When a community stands united, even the most formidable adversaries can be brought to their knees.